Well, let's move on. Dr. Cole, traditionally, athletic trainers, physical therapists, and more could only collect athletic performance data in a lab or clinical setting, but athletes are really more comfortable and perform their best where it matters on the field, in the pool, on the track, and that's where this data should be collected. Now, by leveraging wearable sensors and optical cameras, this real-time objective data collection is now possible from the field. So I wanted to dive into this neat little advancement in science and something you're familiar with, I know, Dr. Cole.
Steve, we have been doing in-stadium cameras in the NBA for a number of years, and to your point, it's allowed us to collect just an insane amount of data related to physical loads, endurance, direction change, and we've for several years tried to look at that data and say, hey, how does it relate to performance? How does it relate to injury? And using these optical camera systems has probably been one of the greatest advancements we've seen in elite sports to be able to get this real-time data. So there are challenges, mind you. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how to correlate the data we're getting in the stadium with injuries and injury prevention, but we know so much more now from these systems.
Well, our next guest is an expert in this field, Dr. Kim Duffy, joining us from the UK. Dr. Kim Duffy is a life science product manager at Vicon, a motion capture technology provider that works across the life sciences branches. Dr. Duffy, how are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm fantastic, thank you. How are you?
Everything's great. We really appreciate you joining us. And tell our listeners, our audience, what is motion capture and how is it used in sports today?
So motion capture is the process of recording movement of people or objects. Vicon has been in this industry for over 35 years. And in the sports injury, we're looking at three predominant areas. Looking at, can we understand what injury is? Are we able to prevent that injury, allow our athlete to return to play? Can we improve performance? Because as we can all appreciate, we're now looking at shaving milliseconds off performance, and that could be the difference between winning a gold medal and finishing fourth in Olympic Games. And there's also being able to understand the equipment that our athletes are using. Are they using the right equipment to aid their performance or potentially protect them? You think for NFL with football, you want to minimize the risk of concussions, for instance. So being able to understand those properties using motion capture is very useful information.
Kim, can you give me an example in some of the sports that you've worked with that you've really made headway in and maybe changed the course of injury or prevention or return to sport?
Yeah, we've seen a massive amount of that in lower limb injuries. Take, for example, the Sports Injury Clinic. They get 4,000 to 5,000 knee injuries addressed per year. So having that massive data set to be able to understand the root of the problem of a knee. You look at soccer players or volleyball players, especially females, there's such a high percentage of ACL injuries due to the anatomy of the female body. So being able to understand where that injury is more likely to take place and then being able to personalize that training throughout their training process and also competition has been very useful.
I'm Steve Cashel with Dr. Brian Coe. You're listening to Sports Medicine Weekly here on The Score. Our website is sportsmedicineweekly.com. What is Capture You, Dr. Kim? How does it work?
So this is a mobile application, and one of the benefits of that is that we're able to take and capture data out in the field. So you can imagine you have a swimming athlete, you're able to use a wearable sensor, what we call our blue trident inertial sensor, that can measure things such as acceleration. Looking at that in swimming, even at the track side, we've seen quite a lot of use cases of where this has been really beneficial. For example, with the Spalding National Running Center, they're using these inertial sensors to explore loading impacts during marathon running. So being able to understand those mechanisms in field is so useful, because we do appreciate that if they perform that in a lab, is that realistic movement? We need to be measuring this where they're actually performing to understand it. And this is where Capture is really good, because we're able to get real-time data, video overlay, and being able to get audio feedback. For example, I'm a soccer player. And when I was injured with a bone contusion, it was really good for me to get audible cues to understand, was I hitting the ball hard enough compared to my right limb? So having that audio feedback is not only useful for the coach and strength and conditioner and physical therapist, but also the athlete being able to understand their performance and movement.
Kim, in that setting, are you wearing a sensor on your leg, on your upper body? Is there an external camera? Is all the technology built in the sensor or the wearable?
Yeah, so our Blue Trident sensor can be applied anywhere. We see a lot of use cases where they're applied with a strap at the ankles, because there is such a high percentage of injuries at the lower limbs. You look at stress fractures, for instance, and then using that, we're then able to stream that data from the wearable tech to an iOS device. And we get that information streamed real time, and then you can use that mobile device to capture video data simultaneously and overlay that on top. So that obviously the coach and also the athlete can then replay that movement and understand, okay, you've got a really high peak acceleration here. Let's change your movement, or we can then work on that in the lab. We might need to do more strengthening exercises, for instance.
Again, visiting with Dr. Kim Duffy, Life Science Product Manager at Vicon. Dr. Claw, I wanted to ask you, for our listeners out there in the weekend warriors, how can they take advantage of such technology? Do you think this is basically for high-level team sports?
Not at all. We're seeing that motion capture and wearable tech is becoming cheaper, easier to use, and more accessible. I'm sure if I ask you both now, if you go out running, do you use a smartwatch, for instance, or a mobile device to assess how quick you're running? We're seeing a lot more of what we would see as our novice users and grassroots being used in that. And you're seeing it even in America, for instance, with children. So there's a high participation of children performing in schools and also grassroots sports clubs. And that is over 4.6 million. That could be a lot higher. And that percentage of them that get emergency injuries, which is up to 2.6 million children, end up having to go into the hospital because of sports injuries. They're seeing that wearable tech is really beneficial to understand the risk of injury. Can we stop it before it's happening? Are you overtraining? Is fatigue coming into play? And a lot more people are wanting to understand how they perform. Could I potentially get a new trainer to make myself quicker and things like that?
And Dr. Brian Cole, this is where we're going with it, right? I mean, this is interesting stuff, and you've seen the success rate at things like this with this modern science technology, correct?
Steve, we've been doing motion analysis at our facilities, even at Midwest Orthopedics in our labs for throwers. We've learned a lot in terms of how, for example, our pitchers throw with different procedures. We've learned about injury prevention and recovery. Clearly, though, that's a lab setting, and I agree. I think what Kim's pointing out is something that we need to be able to measure in real time out on the field, where you're not sort of creating an artificial environment. I think, again, the one thing that everyone has to keep in mind is that the ability to collect data is important. We also have to know what to do with that data and have validated metrics and to make decisions on helping an athlete recover or even before that prevent them from getting injured. So the research aspect, even though it becomes a retail play in some instances, and we're seeing it in our communities, me too, I subscribe to this when I run, like she's pointed out, we have to actually understand how to use that data responsibly. And so I'm really impressed with sort of the volume of science that this company has actually put forth to actually help make a difference for our athletes. So definitely going in the right direction, and we're really starting to harness the ability of technology to make a difference in injury, and that's really the holy grail when you think about it. If we can prevent injury in any capacity, that has a tremendous impact on our society.
Well, Dr. Kim Duffy, thanks so much for joining us this morning on Sports Medicine Weekly. Continued success at Vicon, and we hope that you stay healthy.
Thank you. You too.
We're going to take a break here on Sports Medicine Weekly. When we return, we're going to come back with our staple of the show. It's our Ask the Doctor segment. We've got some great questions again this week from our listeners for Dr. Cole. Stay with us, Steve Cashel, Dr. Brian Cole at Sports Medicine Weekly, only on
670 The Score.